Hello, 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 everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I am a Tolkien scholar. And if you might wonder what that means, it means that I have studied the works of J.R.R. Tolkien for a very long time, pretty much since I was a young boy. I will admit that the serious study was not as a young boy, but I started reading Tolkien as a young boy and never really stopped, and have tried my best to understand every aspect of it that I can, and I pass on that understanding to you as best I can as well. So I'm the guy that you can come to with any question about The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion or any of his works. We have a lot of your questions to get through today. We have 21 of them, but I did want to say before we start, if you like the video, feel free to subscribe, but also consider membership. Membership is huge. It really helps me out and helps me continue to do this for you guys. It is a paid membership, and you don't, of course, have to do that. You can just regular subscribe and enjoy the videos, but you will get to see the videos early. I'm going to be pushing out a video sometime soon. I keep kind of putting it off, but sometime soon about the perks of membership and specifically talking about that, but the videos come out quite early for members, so and you get a nifty little badge in the comments, and there's other perks and such. But anyway, let's get to the reading. Today I'm going to be reading to you from the Silmarillion, and the part of it that I chose for you is a little bit of Beren and Luthien, specifically regarding Finrod Felagund. Finrod is Galadriel's brother, who fought Sauron and died, and I'm kind of choosing that part of it because he was a good friend of Beren's, and that's where the connection comes from. So here we go, let's do this. On an evening of autumn, Felagund and Beren set out from Nargothrond with 10 companions, and they journeyed beside Narog on to his source in the Falls of Ervin. Beneath the shadowy mountains they came upon a company of orcs and slew them all in their camp by night. And they took their gear and their weapons. By the arts of Felagund, their own forms and faces were changed into the likeness of orcs, and thus disguised they came far upon their northward road, and ventured into the western pass between Ered Wethrin and the highlands of Taur Nufuin. But Sauron in his tower was aware of them, and doubt took him, for they went in haste, and stayed not to report their deeds, as was commanded to all servants of Morgoth that passed their way. Therefore he sent to waylay them, and bring them before him. Thus befell the contest of Sauron and Felagund, which is renowned, for Felagund strove with Sauron in songs of power, and the power of the king was very great, but Sauron had the mastery, as is told in the Lay of Leithian. He chanted a song of wizardry, of piercing, opening, of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying. And suddenly Felagund there swaying, sang in answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept, strength like a tower, and trust unbroken, freedom, escape, of changing and of shifting shape, of snares eluded, broken traps, the prison opening, the chain that snaps. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering as ever more strong. The chanting swelled, Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought. Of elveness into his words, softly in the gloom they heard the birds, singing afar in Nargothrond, the sighing of the sea beyond the western world on sand the pearls in elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor, the red blood flowing. Beside the sea where the Noldor slew, the foam riders and stealing drew. Their white ships with their white sails, from lamplit havens the wind wails, the wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea, the captives sad and Angband mourn, thunder rumbles, the fires burn, and Finrod fell before the throne. Then Sauron stripped him from their disguise, and they stood before him naked and afraid. But though their kinds were revealed, Sauron could not discover their names or their purposes. He cast them therefore into a deep pit, dark and silent, and threatened to slay them cruelly unless one would betray the truth to him. From time to time they saw 2 eyes kindled in the dark, and a werewolf devoured one of the companions, but none betrayed their lord. In the time when Sauron cast Beren into the pit, a weight of horror came upon Luthien's heart, and going to Melian for counsel, she learned that Beren lay in the dungeons of Tol and Gauroth, without hope of rescue. Then Luthien, perceiving that no help would come from any other on earth, resolved to fly from Doriath and come herself to him. But she sought the aid of Daeron, and he betrayed her purpose to the king. Then Thingol was filled with fear and wonder, and because he would not deprive Luthien of the lights of heaven, lest she fail and fade, and yet would restrain her, he caused a house to be built from which she could not escape. Not far from the gates of Menegroth stood the greatest of all the trees in the forest of Neldareth, and that was a beech forest in the northern half of the kingdom. This mighty beech was named Hröa, and it had 3 trunks, equal in girth, smooth in rind, and exceeding tall. No branches grew from them a great height above the ground. Far aloft between the shafts of Hröa a wooden house was built, and there Luthien was made to dwell, and the ladders were taken away and guarded, save only when the servants of Thingol brought her such things as she needed. It is told in the Lay of Leithian how she escaped from the house of Hröa, for she put forth her arts of enchantment and caused her hair to grow to great length. And of it she wove a dark robe that wrapped her beauty like a shadow, and it was laden with a spell of sleep. Of the strands that remained she twined a rope, and she let it down from her window, and at the end swayed above the guards that sat beneath the tree. They fell into a deep slumber. Then Luthien climbed from her prison, and shrouded in her shadowy cloak she escaped from all eyes and vanished out of Doriath. So you could really see here that Barren and Luthien is one of, if not the oldest of the stories of the Legendarium that Tolkien wrote. He wrote The Fall of Gondolin, and he wrote Barren and Luthien around 1917 to 1919 when he was staying in a hospital after contracting trench fever during World War I. And his wife was with him, Edith, and he wrote these stories, or the primitive versions of these stories. And you could tell that it's early work adapted into the Silmarillion, because it's very fairy tale-ish. And Tolkien had concerned himself greatly with fairy tales and their telling, and you can see this sort of fairy tale telling of Barren and Finrod disguising themselves as orc through secret arts that the king of the elves, Finrod, can just do, and getting captured by Sauron, and then this contest of song, and Finrod really should have known better than to challenge one of the Ainur to a battle like that of song, because Sauron was one of the many angels that helped sing the universe into existence through the Ainu Lindale. So, that being said, he was destined to lose that one, and then of course they're told to betray each other, and there's this werewolf slowly one by one eating them, and they're right. Luthien is told by Melian the Seer that he's in danger and is not going to be rescued anytime soon, and she's going to go there. But then her father, Thingol, the king of the Sindar elves, basically locks her away, and she kind of does this Rapunzel thing mixed in with a bit of more Germanic folklore, fairy tales, with the spell of sleep in her hair and the garment she makes, and it's all very cool. Barren and Luthien's a great tale of adventure. It's a great sort of fairy story. But anyway, let's get to your questions. We have 21 of them to get through, so let's start here. Okay, so our first question came in from the Oski Bosky, who asked, who impregnated Ungoliant, or does she have both genders? So Ungoliant is unquestionably female. Ungoliant is always referred to as female, but as to who impregnated her, that's a rather easy answer. Right after Ungoliant flees from the Balrogs, we get this little tidbit from the Silmarillion. For other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband. And she mated with them and devoured them, and even after Ungoliant herself departed, and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there and wove their hideous webs. The various fathers of the children that she would have would be the other foul creatures of spider form that came up out of the depths of the earth through the tunnels that were delved when Morgoth's fortress Angband was first created. In true spider form, she not only mated with them, but then she ate them afterwards. She devoured them. She had many children, though by the third age the only surviving one was Shelob, though she herself had her own brood and infesting Middle-earth, most notably Mirkwood. Okay, next question. Okay, so this question comes in from Joe Lee, or I think it's Geo Lee, who asks, are the Silmarils still recoverable? Yes, but only at the end of the world. Tolkien's vision in the end of Arda, it changed over time, and the idea of the final battle may have even been abandoned, but there were a few things that remain consistent through every version of the prophecy, and one of them would be the recovery of the Silmarillion. One is accounted for. It's with the Eärendil. The only thing that they would need to do is get it from him. The other two are harder to find, but not impossible. One is in the sea, and one is in the earth. So once they are reunited, Feanor will either break them open, or he'll give them to the Valar, and the Valar will break them open, and the two trees will be revived. And this also comes with the end of the world and the second music, where the world will be reborn without the taint of Melkor. Next question. Did J.R.R. Tolkien ever comment on whether or not he believes Saruman could be redeemed after betraying the White Council and joining forces with Sauron during the War of the Ring? Tolkien did not comment on that, nor would he comment on such a thing for various reasons, but let's go over like the main two reasons. The first reason that Tolkien would not comment on a character's redemption is that it was not his place to do so. He was asked this a few times about Gollum specifically, who died with the One Ring. Would he be forgiven by Ilúvatar, that is to say God, and find redemption for all of the terrible things that he's done, or was he too far gone? Tolkien was uncomfortable with the question. He stated that it was a private matter. Tolkien did not just have a character that was the god of Arda, or a character that represented God. He saw Ilúvatar and the God of Abraham as being indistinguishable. They are the same entity. That being said, he would not presume to know of someone's fate beyond death. The second reason that Tolkien would not answer such a question was based off of the nature of the character. Saruman was an eternal Ainu spirit, a Maiar of Aula, who had gone astray, much as Sauron had, but far less successful both in good and in evil. Saruman dies in The Return of the King, quote-unquote dies, but this is just the slaying of his incarnate form. He's still around. He's an angel. He can't really die permanently. Saruman's spirit being blown away by a cold wind out of the west, which echoed what happened to Sauron, at least on a less impressive scale, is essentially he's become an exile. He is not welcome back home. He can't return. Though unlike Sauron, he wasn't dissipated to show that he had no power left, but Saruman had looked to the west, and then he felt that cold wind, and he sighed and turned away. So after everything that he had done, Saruman still somehow thought that he would be welcome in Valinor, and Manwë's answer to that was hard no, and it came immediately. He now must just wander Middle-earth as a wind. Can he be redeemed? Yes. Will he be redeemed? That's up to him. He has to repent, and Saruman has a lot of time to overcome his pride. He has until the end of the world, so it's very possible that he may repent and therefore be redeemed, but we don't really know. Next question. How was Rivendell a well-protected realm if it had been portrayed in movies such as a paradise and not as a fortress? Oh, I see what you're saying. So, because there are other ways to protect a realm than having high walls. Just ask the Nazgûl. When the Nazgûl come over the ford of Bruinen after Frodo, who was riding on Asphaleth, they were swept away by a great flood, and Glorfindel had been there to ensure that all of the 9 were in the river before the flood came. This dispersed them. It killed nearly all the horses. Only one survived, and essentially it put their mission behind by months. So though Elrond had a bit of help here, the magic was boosted by Gandalf, whose idea it was to make the waves look like riders atop horses, it was still a thing that Elrond could just do at any time that he wanted to enforce his border. Elrond also had one of the rings of power, Vilya, the Ring of Air. It was also known as the Blue Ring. It was said to be the greatest of the three rings, and if you look at how Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, had protected Lothlórien, not only from invaders, but from the effects of time, you can imagine that the protective powers of Elrond's ring were probably quite a lot better than just some stone walls. Okay, next question. Was Smaug, the dragon from The Hobbit, depicted with wings? Yes. Smaug was definitely a flying dragon, and he absolutely had wings. If you look at The Hobbit, can I reach it? No. If you look at The Hobbit and you look at Thror's map, you could see in Thror's map there is a little drawing of Smaug flying around the mountain, and that was something that J.R.R. Tolkien himself wrote. And Smaug, of course, has wings. He also drew Smaug a few other times, such as his famous drawing Conversations with Smaug, and every time he was drawn by Tolkien, he drew him with wings. Then, of course, we have the description when Bilbo first sees Smaug in the flesh. I'm going to read you that relevant part of The Hobbit. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon, fast asleep. A thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils, and wisps of smoke, but his fires were low in slumber. Beneath him, under all his limbs and his huge coiled tail, and about him on all sides stretching away across the unseen floors, lay countless piles of precious things, gold wrought and unwrought, gems and jewels, and silver red stained in the ruddy light. Smaug lay with wings folded like an immeasurable bat, turned partly on one side so that the hobbit could see that his underparts and his long pale belly crusted with gems and fragments of gold from his long lying on his costly blade. Behind him, where the walls were nearest, could dimly be seen coats of mail, helms and axes, swords and spears hanging, and there in rows stood great jars and vessels filled with a wealth that could not be guessed. So, obviously there's the part about the wings folded like an immeasurable bat. Thankfully, there can be no big wing discourse about Smaug like we have with Balrogs. There were, of course, dragons that did not have wings in Tolkien's work, though. The first ever dragon, Glaurung, did not have wings, and it was normal for dragons of the First Age to not have wings until the winged dragons made their first debut at the end of the age during the War of Wrath. Okay, next question. Why did they change the number of the dwarves who survived? So I guess to really get the full answer, you'd have to ask somebody who had done some production on the movie, or the heirs of Rankin and Bass themselves, but the best I can do for you here is a guess. The easy answer to me seems that it's most likely that they were just trying to be more dramatic. We're told that there were 7 dwarves that survived in the cartoon, and it will soon be 6 because Thorin was dying. Of course, in the book, only 3 dwarves died. Fili, Kili, and Thorin died, and the movie is very non-specific about which dwarves died and which ones lived. They may have simply just upped the body count to make it more dramatic that so few dwarves remained. Another thing to consider may be that the dwarves in the movie version, in the cartoon, they barely matter to the story. Only Thorin, Dori, Balin, and Bombur have unique voices. All of the rest of the dwarves actually shared one voice actor. Thorin is the only of the dwarves to have a voice actor that doesn't also play somebody else in the movie as well. Bombur's actor played one of the trolls, Dori's actor played the Great Goblin and Bard, and Balin's actor played another troll, a goblin, and Gwaihir. Even the one actor who plays all the rest of the dwarves also voiced the third troll. And you know what? I'm fine with it. I will defend the 1977 Hobbit cartoon. It was a good adaptation. Yes, the characters look ugly in stills, and that was the main issue that Christopher Tolkien had when he was shown pictures of it. He thought it was hideous, but it actually works better in motion. Yes, it's a musical, but it's also a good and mostly faithful adaptation, and there were a lot of songs in The Hobbit to begin with. And yes, it removes things and it streamlines the story, but this to me is preferable to the bloated live-action trilogy that we later got. Plus, it's Bilbo's story. It's supposed to be about Bilbo. It's called The Hobbit. It's not the story of the 13 Dwarves. Okay, next question. This one came in from Dennis, who asked, do you have any idea how Gandalf planned for the Fellowship to get into Mordor? The Black Gate does not seem like a good option. So here's the thumbnail question. This is one of my favorite questions that crops up from time to time, mostly because there really isn't a clear answer. This is one of those things that Tolkien, with purpose, left ambiguous. Gandalf never shared his plans for the Fellowship beyond getting to Lothlórien. So how he planned to get into Mordor, or exactly who he planned to go with Frodo and who would not go with Frodo, was a bit up in the air. We know that under no circumstances would Boromir go to Mordor. The plan was always for him to go to Minas Tirith, and that it was Gandalf's wish that Aragorn would accompany him, Boromir, that is, as Gandalf very much wanted Aragorn to reclaim the throne and become king. So beyond this, though, there's no indication of what Gandalf's plans were for splitting up the Fellowship, nor what route he had planned to take into Mordor, or if he himself was planning on going there or not. It is possible that Gandalf may have had a plan and never shared it, but I think his plan was just to get as far as Lothlórien, and that's something that Aragorn actually suspected. He thought that that might be the case. To me, it seems most likely that Gandalf would get there, and then he would put his head together with Galadriel and Celeborn and come up with a plan on how to get into Mordor. Of course, the Black Gate seemed unfeasible, and it was unlikely that he would take Cirith Ungol, but he may have known of another secret way, or he may have had a way of getting through Minas Morgul, for example. So, don't really know, but really nobody does, and I think it's on purpose. Next question. Alright, so this question came in from S. Kesov, who asks, was Mordor a barren land forever? Would it become forest, or at least livable, if the blessed soil of Lórien, given to Sam by Galadriel, was thrown there? You wouldn't need to do that. Mordor was not barren to begin with. The view of Mordor as being this blasted land, this barren land, it comes from the fact that in both the book and the films, we only see a little bit of it. We know of Udun and Gorgoroth. Udun is barren because it was the site of a lot of war. A lot of battles happened there. And Gorgoroth is an ashland because it's right next to a volcano. Mount Doom is there. Not to mention the constant darkness that surrounds the Dark Tower. However, there are lands to the south and to the east of Mordor that are actually quite fertile. As the volcanic ash gets swept away by wind, it fertilizes the land, and there are some parts of Mordor that are actually quite green. This is how Sauron feeds his armies, as he has slaves working the fields to provide food. After the war, Aragorn made sure that Mordor was a free land for the enemies of Gondor, and specifically the fertile land surrounding the inland sea of Nurnen would be gifted to the freed slaves of Sauron. The northwest part of Mordor recovering is still possible, as Sauron's power no longer was there to keep it always in darkness, and Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, fell, but the volcano is still there, and it was probably still active, so it wouldn't be a pleasant place. Then again, Hawaii is full of active volcanoes, so I could be wrong about that as well. Okay, next question. So, this question, it's quite a long question, but what it boils down to is which of the Valar did Olórin, that's Gandalf, really work for? Because all the Valar have all the Maiar have one Vala that they seem to work for, but Olórin works for many. So here's how the question was worded. Whose Maiar was Olórin? I know he studied under Nienna, but I've also seen mentions of Manwë and Varda. Or are some Maiar interdisciplinary, or did Tolkien change his mind about Olórin? Okay, so in this case, I believe that the Maiar don't really belong to anyone other than by choice. They would choose who they served. Olórin happens to be the guy that really made sure that he took advantage of the right to choose who you learn from. If Olórin, however, had a primary Vala that he served, it was likely Ulmo. That's the Vala that the elves usually just call Olórin, because that was the name of his realm. He also learned from Varda, from Manwë, and of course Nienna, who he came back to for most lessons, particularly the power of patience, pity, and mercy. Olórin was known to be the wisest of the Maiar, and it may perhaps just be because he was the only one who took advantage of multiple Valar's lessons and time, or at least the only one that we know of. Usually they just seem to stick to one, or they jump ship over to Melkor. Next question. How is Thorondor living so long? Is it because he's the messenger of Manwë? So, of course, Thorondor was the Lord of the Eagles. He did live for a really long time. This is one of those things that Tolkien kind of flip-flopped about, though we actually don't know how long Thorondor lived. The nature of the Eagles was something that the author changed his mind about twice. At first, in the very early writings, the Eagles of Manwë were Maiar spirits that just took the form of birds rather than an elf-like appearance. This would make Thorondor something very similar to Gandalf or to Sauron, an eternal angelic figure, but in the form of a bird. This would explain the longevity of the Eagles, though Thorondor is curiously not mentioned as being in any parts of the story that took place in the Second Age or the Third Age. He just kind of disappears from the story after the War of Wrath, with the title of the Lord of the Eagles falling to his son or possibly his grandson. We're not exactly sure of the relation, which would be Gwaihir. Gwaihir, though, was definitely around in the First Age. He was mentioned in the book The War of the Jewels, that the two vassals that Thorondor had with him when he rescued Barren and Luthien were Gwaihir and his brother Landroval, who was also still kicking in the Third Age. So the Eagles are Maiar, right? Except at one point, Tolkien changed his mind about this. Instead, he saying that they were just eagles. They were animals, but of a greater order, with the sense that the same change applied to Huan, the Hound of Valinor. He started off as a Maiar, and then he was just a dog, but he was a talking dog, and he was of a higher order. So that would mean that the eagles were not eternal, but they may have either been functionally immortal, which means that they're killable, but they will not return like elves would, or they're what Tolkien referred to as longevous, which means that their natural lifespans were in the thousands of years, like Ents. This would account for Gwaihir being around 6,000 years old or so, and still quite spry. However, late in life, Tolkien changed his mind back to the original idea that the Eagles were indeed Maiar. Here's an excerpt from The Nature of Middle-earth, which contains some of his last bits of writing. The first bit comes from the section Manwë's Ban. His messengers could come from Valinor and did so, and though in disguised form, and issuing no commands, they intervened in certain desperate events. And then we go over to footnote 3 in that section where it's elaborated on. The most notable were those Maiar who took the form of the mighty speaking eagles that we hear of in the legends of the War of the Noldor against Melkor, who remained in the west of Middle-earth until the fall of Sauron and the dominion of men, after which they were not heard of again. Their intervention in the story of Maelor, in the duel of Fingolfin and Melkor, and the rescue of Beren and Luthien is well known. Beyond their knowledge were the deeds of the Eagles in the war against Sauron, in the rescue of the Ring-Finder and his companions, in the Battle of Five Armies, and in the rescue of the Ring-Bearer from the fires of Mount Doom. Furthermore, it was mentioned in footnote 1 that birds just could not fly across the sea no matter how strong they were, as the Band of Manwë was that strong. No matter how great a ship or how strong a bird, it was impossible. I guess until some wise guy with a Silmaril gets through. But this does seem to be a late alteration to the text that firmly puts Thorondor and all the Eagles in the Maiar category. Okay, next question. Do we know anything about the marriage customs of hobbits? Is it safe to assume that they were more or less the same as traditional English wedding customs? So I find this to be a really interesting question. I've never heard this one before. We are told a lot about marriages, who marries who, but not a lot of detail is given about ceremonies, about weddings. We're given a brief description of Aragorn and Arwen marrying, and a bit more detail was given in the ceremony of Aldarion and Arendis in Unfinished Tales, but usually it's just mentioned that the characters got married with no great description of the wedding custom. But it's possible that Hobbit wedding custom may have been pretty similar to the Númenórean wedding custom as seen with Aldarion and Arendis in the story of the Mariner's Wife in Unfinished Tales, and also with Aragorn and Arwen later on in the story. So this is due to the fact that the Shire, being the largest Hobbit settlement and the second being Bree, they're both located in Arnor. While they were, of course, free to have their own customs, the Hobbits of the Shire, they liked the customs of Arnor, which would be derived from Númenor. So while the Shire was founded after Arnor split into various realms, there were 3 parts of it, due to the next heir of the king having a quarrel with his 2 younger brothers, the eldest and rightful king became the king of Arthedain, where both Bree and the Shire were located. So it was under the rule of Arthedain that Bree-land hobbits lived under and by royal permission that they founded the Shire. After there was no longer any kings in Arthedain, nor any kings in the land of Arnor at all, the hobbits kept the same laws because they liked those laws, and they just appointed a thane to act as king, as well as a mayor for more ceremonial and day-to-day functions. So with that in mind, Hobbit wedding customs in the Shire are at least more likely similar to those in Gondor, because they shared a similar root. I would just imagine there'd be a little Hobbit flair thrown in here. In other words, a lot more food, I would imagine. Okay, next question. Can you explain the difference between a body and a hröa in J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium? So a hröa actually is a body. It's specifically an incarnate body. There are 2 types of beings in Tolkien's Legendarium that have bodies, the incarnate and the discarnate. Both of these beings have spirits or souls, and both of them have bodies most of the time. Discarnate spirits are referred to as Ialar, which roughly translates to beings that exist. There are spirits who are complete. They do not require a body to be considered a complete being. They can, however, choose to have a body to give them what Tolkien refers to as shape and hue. That makes them visible to the children of Ilúvatar, whether in forms resembling the children or in forms of their own thoughts of majesty and dread. These bodies are called fanar. The singular for these words would be Iala and Fana. So beings that are incarnate, which means given flesh, are still made up of 2 parts, a body and a spirit, but they're not complete unless they have both. The spirits are referred to as fear, or just fea if it's singular, and the bodies are hröa, or hröa is the singular. So a hröa is a body, but specifically a body of a being that needs a body to be considered complete, that if the body is gone, it's diminished. It's half of what it was. Okay, next question. If Ulmo was authorized by Eru to act against Númenor, would he be capable of doing the same of what Eru himself did? No, not at all. So there's no doubt that Ulmo could sink Númenor. He wouldn't even have to do it himself. He could delegate the task to Ossé if he wanted to. Ossé was the one who raised Númenor up. He could just as easily sink it. However, one has to remember that there was quite a lot more to the Akallabêeth than just Númenor sinking. Ilúvatar's feat was far, far greater. The sinking of the island was not only secondary to the primary scope of the Akallabêeth, but you might say that it was kind of a byproduct of the event. Ilúvatar didn't just point his finger at Númenor and destroy it, but he broke the world. Arda was broken and reshaped from a flat sphere into a sphere. He also removed the Undying Lands from the landmass and put these lands in Ilmarin, which is basically space, while also preserving a straight road that made them accessible to the elves. This had a wide effect on the entire world. Some lands became lost, and there were other new lands that arose, and it was said that after this event that there was no land in the entire planet that had a memory of a time without evil. So while Ulmo and even Osse were happily and handily capable of destroying Numenor, Ilúvatar's feat is far beyond the scope of any of the Valar. Okay, next question. Is Sam portrayed as more intelligent than people give him credit for in The Lord of the Rings? Absolutely, yes. And it's even acknowledged in The Lord of the Rings by Aragorn. So Sam is meant to be understood as simple. He's not lacking intelligence, though. The name Samwise refers to him being half-wise, which some have poetically pointed out that his father basically named him Half-Wit. Though he is based on no particular person, Tolkien did acknowledge that he has his own similarities with Sam. Though he called Sam a braver person than he was, and a better person than he was, Sam is sort of the quintessential Hobbit. He's quite removed from the rich and eccentric Bilbo or even Frodo, who is still landed gentry. What we see in The Lord of the Rings, particularly at the end of the story, are that there are far more hobbits that are like Sam than there are hobbits like Frodo or Merry or Pippin, because they're all rich and aristocratic. Most of the hobbits of the Shire are blue-collar laborers like Sam, and it isn't any wonder that they elected him mayor for a period of 49 years. Sam is very smart. He's not sophisticated, nor is he shrewd or particularly nuanced, but he has his own homespun wisdom that he inherited from his father, and a good amount of education from Bilbo to make him often the voice of reason. Even when he's wrong, like when he distrusted Strider, who turned out to be Aragorn, he is correct in stating that they had no reason at that point to trust Strider, at least until he saw proof. Sam is the guy who cuts across all the intellectuals and speaks plainly, and he sees things from a completely different point of view. So in the King's Letter, which was a letter sent after the events of The Lord of the Rings from Aragorn to the Shire, Aragorn mentions that he will be traveling to the lands just outside of the Shire, and he would very much like to meet all of his friends, and he mentions, in one line, he mentions Sam particularly, and shows the respect that the king has for the mayor. So in the letter it says, Edrogole entrasrade kerja perhel, isenue pantheles thero en condredran. So this sentence mentions that he especially wants to meet Sam, mayor of the Shire. But the parenthetical is the interesting part. I'm going to go through it. So, Edrogole anira tirade cerdia perhel. He's saying, I especially want to meet Samwise. Perhel is Samwise, but it's the literal translation in Elvish, half-wise. Condoridran at the end of it is mayor of the Shire. But the part in parentheses, Isenue pantheil estetharthen. That's saying a better name would be full-wise. So Sam is half, per, wise is hail. In parentheses, he says, Samwise, half-wise? No, full-wise. He's a lot smarter than that. So Aragorn is stating that Sam's name belies his true nature and that he is fully wise. Next question. Why do elven swords glow? So, not all of them do, but specific swords that were made by the greatest craftsmen in Gondolin. So, in The Hobbit, we are introduced to these three blades found in the Troll Hoard. The two of them are rather spectacular and powerful swords, obviously very important weapons, while the third was a short dagger. The dagger had no name that we know of, though Bilbo took a liking to it, and he later named it Sting. The two swords, one taken by Gandalf and the other taken by Thorin, were later identified by Elrond. The sword that Gandalf took was Glamdring, which means foe hammer, while Thorin's sword was Orcrist, which means goblin cleaver. As an aside, this destroys any and all orcs and goblins are two different things, claptrap. Elrond straight up translates Orcrist as goblin cleaver. Rist is derived from the primitive Quendian word kyris, which means to cleave. So the swords were forged in Gondolin during what Elrond refers to as the Goblin Wars. But we understand as the general wars of Beleriand, where Gondolin was one of the major outposts of elves against Morgoth's forces. So Orcrist and Glamdring were important. Glamdring was the sword of King Turgon himself, while Orcrist was just like its mate, and it was likely used by a very important elf. It might have even been Ecthelion. The greatest craftsmen could put a bit of themselves into their work, and the animosity between the elves and the orcs is as old as the orcs themselves. They were mockeries of the elves, so the greatest Gondolin smiths could forge weapons that glow with burning blue fire when their enemy was nearby. This does not mean that every single sword that was made in Gondolin did this, but only the really important ones. And this does actually suggest that Sting may have been an important weapon, even if it was a secondary weapon, like the dagger that Glorfindel used to kill a Balrog. But no, it could not have been that exact dagger. I get that a lot. Could the dagger that Glorfindel used to kill the Balrog wind up being Sting? The reason that it couldn't be is because that fell with him and was likely buried with him when Gwaihir carried him up out of the pit, and he was buried, and his weapon would have been buried with him. And that was in Beleriand. It's long gone. It's underwater. So that's done. Anyway, let's get on to the next question. Okay, so this one came in from Russell Kurtz, who asks, can Maiar teleport? No, I don't think so. It doesn't seem that any being in Tolkien's literature has this ability. The possible exception would be God himself, because he's sort of everywhere at once. Ilúvatar would have the ability to teleport if he wished, based solely on Ilúvatar as God, and therefore he can do anything he wants to. That whole argument. But the Maiar, however, definitely not. None of the Maiar we are aware of have ever done this. Like the wizards, Sauron, Ossé, Eonwë, Arion, Tilion, Yuinen, Imari, the Balrog, Salmo, all of them were always depicted as traveling by various means, but never teleporting. Not even the Valar were ever explicitly stated to do this, though I have my suspicion about Namamandos. Though it's possible that the figure on the rock that spoke the doom was not him, but a messenger of his, or a projection, because it vanished shortly after. Okay, next question. Okay, so this question came in from Sean Patrick, who asks, if Gollum had survived the ring's destruction, how quickly would he have died? So I don't think he would have lasted very long, but not for the reason that most people think. It's a common misconception that Gollum would just crumble to dust the moment the One Ring was destroyed. People base this on kind of two reasons. One is that they say that Bilbo aged rapidly after he gave up the One Ring. This isn't true. But this is what people go by, and the Nazgul winking out of existence once the One Ring was destroyed, being well past their mortal lifespans. So the first point is easy to debunk. At no point does Tolkien write or indicate in any way that Bilbo rapidly aged after he gave up the One Ring, or even after it was destroyed. This seems to be based almost entirely on the movie, which had Bilbo as already looking far older than he should have, and then he deteriorated quite a bit by the end of the film. Some people also point out that in the book, Bilbo seemed to be going senile at the end. Doesn't matter. Bilbo didn't age rapidly, but his aging did resume naturally. He gave up the ring at the age of 111. Physically, he was 50. And he sailed to the west at the age of 131. Physically, he would have been about 70. He would indeed look older at this point. But as the films do not indicate that such a time span has passed, and Bilbo already looked far older than 50 at the beginning of the movie, people got it into their heads that he went full Crypt Keeper once he gave up the ring. Bilbo's mental state is not even relevant. He explained to Gandalf that while he did not look old, he certainly felt old. Regardless of the fact that he looked about 70 at the end of the book, he was still a 131-year-old hobbit, and he had a 131-year-old mind. As for the Nazgul, they are far, far older than Gollum, and they were not bearers of the One Ring. They were bound to the Nine, and the Nine were bound to the One. They could not leave the world. Their bodies had long since perished. They were fully in the Wraith world, but they could not pass away, as they were bound by necromancy. The destruction of the One Ring released them from this, just as Merry's strike rendered the Witch King's undead flesh bound to the real world for Éowyn to be able to kill him. The One Ring is very different from the other rings, as it extended the life of Bilbo and of Gollum, and even Frodo was said to not age physically once he came into the ring, despite the fact that he didn't actually wear it or even carry it around with him. Just the fact that he owned it made him stop aging. Gollum did not become a wraith, but his form changed greatly. There's no indication that he would suddenly be like, oh, I'm 500 years old, hobbits don't live that long, and then just turn into bones. Of course, I did say that he wouldn't last long, so let me talk about that. Gollum's body might survive for a time, but his mind, definitely not. He would be fully and completely broken. If Gollum did not take his own life in wrath and despair immediately, he might just lay down and die from despair. If he didn't do that, if he avoided it, he would be just a complete wreck. He would not eat, he wouldn't sleep, he wouldn't take care of himself, he would just sob and wail until either he died or someone put him out of his misery. He was too bound to the One Ring and so far gone that healing him was likely not possible for him. The cure would have been more fatal to him than anything else, I think. Okay, next question. Okay, so this one came in from Roger Calico, who asks, in the Lord of the Rings universe, is there a hell that dead evil characters go to? So if there is, we're not told about it. The mortal afterlife is kept a secret and a mystery for a good reason. I kind of talked about this a bit earlier, about the way that Tolkien thinks, so let's not get into that too much, but in the Undying Lands, there is a cavernous area called Mandos, and it's tended to by the Vala Namo. The elves just call him Mandos, which is not so usual. I mentioned earlier they call Olórin because his realm was Lórien. Namo is called the Doomkeeper, and his halls are where the slain and the dead go, at least for a little while. Some may describe Mandos as purgatorial, however, I view it more as a waypoint. Elves are not meant to die. They're meant to persist until the end of the world, not growing old unless adversely affected by Melkor's taint, after which their bodies may become overcome by their spirits, and they fade and they become houseless spirits. But they're very much still alive. But the fact remains that elves are just not meant to die. They never grow sick. Age doesn't slow them down until they live to be 10,000 centuries old. However, they can be slain or laid to waste in grief and sorrow, at which point their spirits come to Mandos. There, if their body is in good enough shape to return to, they may return, or if not, once their body fully is withered and dissolves away, they can get a new one, identical to the original. The reason that people think of Mandos as purgatorial, though, is that Namo can and will hold the elves there if he deems them a danger or in need of repentance. This is, however, not the main function of this area. The elves aren't supposed to die, like I said. Mortals, though, they have an allotted time on Earth, after which they pass beyond the circles of the world and they go beyond. What lies beyond? They don't know, and they're not to know. The path is only known to Mandos, and the destination is only known to Ilúvatar. The nature of the mortal afterlife is unknown, and what sort of judgment can be passed is also unknown. This is due to the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the author's faith and his sensibilities precluded him from commenting on where people go when they die. He would say that's between them and God. So men who die before their time, they go to Mandos and they await their time, and then they pass on. This is why Luthien was able to rescue Barren. He was slain, but she was able to bring him back, for he had been slain before his time, and she convinced Namo to let him return, though she had to sacrifice her own immortality in the process. Dwarves are not children of Ilúvatar, but they sit in Mandos until the end of the world, at which point they will finally pass away. Okay. Next question. Okay, so this one actually kind of plays on the last one, which is why I put them together. At what age are elves considered to be at their prime in Middle-earth? Interesting question. I believe that Tolkien did, of course, answer this, but the time period at which the elves are considered to be in the prime of their life is so vast that it encompasses pretty much all the elves. Tolkien's elves are considered physically mature when they're 50 years old, and they're fully adults at the age of 100. So to put it in vaguely human terms, a 50-year-old elf is like a post-adolescent teenager, not an adult, but fully grown. They come of age at 100, or vaguely thereabouts, and they're then considered adults. I would say that this is the start of their prime. In The Lord of the Rings, Frodo is introduced at the end of the story to an elf named Círdan, who is very old. He has long silver hair and a long silver beard. He's old, but Frodo can still see the youthful spark in his eyes. His vigor has not been sapped. It is unusual for elves to have beards, and I've written extensively about the how and why of Círdan's beard and how it fits in with the revised Legendarium, because Círdan's beard was an artifact from an earlier point of the writing. But that's beside the point. Frodo makes it clear that Círdan may look old, but he has a gleam of youth in his eyes. He's not out of his prime. Círdan, at this part of the story, is at least 11,000 years old, and he might be more depending on whether or not he was a first-generation elf. He is certainly the oldest known elf in Middle-earth at the time. There are elves as old as, and possibly older than him in the Undying Lands, who would not even appear old at all. Once again, Círdan's look of advanced age is a separate topic, but so when does an elf fall out of their prime? Here's what the Silmarillion has to say about it. For the elves die not until the world dies, unless they are slain or waste in grief, and both these seeming deaths they are subject. Neither does age subdue their strength, unless they grow weary of 10,000 centuries. So age does make them weak and tired when they reach 10,000 centuries. That's 1,000,000 years old. That's a pretty long prime. So pretty much every adult elf is in their prime, because the world in Tolkien's universe is not even 1,000,000 years old. Next question. Okay, this is a simple one. Were the 9 and 7 rings of power generic rings seized from the elves by Sauron and distributed to men and dwarves as he saw fit, or were they more or less created to suit men and dwarves? So it would be the former. I would discard the word generic, though. The elves of Eregion, also known as Hallan, created the rings of power for their own use. They were instructed by this mysterious figure called Anatar, and they didn't know that he was actually Sauron. 16 rings were created under his supervision, and after he left they made 3 more, and once the one ring was forged, the elves realized that they'd been deceived, and they forsook the usage of their rings. Celebrimbor, who forged the extra 3, took the advice of Galadriel to keep the 3 hidden, as they were the most powerful of all the rings, other than the One Ring, of course, and they were untouched by Sauron, though they were still bound to the one. He gave her one of the rings, and he sent 2 more to Gil-galad in Lindon. Sauron came through, and he took back all the rings. None were made with dwarves or men in mind, but he tried distributing them to both, and while the 7 rings that he gave to the dwarves were largely a failure, he definitely got his money's worth with the 9 rings that he gave to men. Though all the rings, save the one, were designed to be worn and used by elves, the dwarves did claim that out of the 7 rings, one of them was actually given to them by the elves out of friendship, before they knew of danger, of course. Okay, last question. Okay. If the Astari simply invaded Mordor and mashed Sauron combined, how many lives would be saved? Or is magic nuking Sauron not an option because it will slaughter thousands of innocents in Mordor too? So, to be honest with you, it wouldn't matter in the long run, which is why they didn't do it. The Astari, the wizards, combined, probably could do what you described. However, there's kind of 2 issues with this. One, as soon as Sauron sees 5 agents of the Valar coming directly for him, he's going to hide, and he will not be found. Sauron is essentially the Middle-earth hide-and-seek champion. Even the Valar could not find him, and they did, in fact, try to find him at one point. 2, defeating Sauron, not the point. Making it so that Sauron could never return. That was what the point was, and that involved destroying the One Ring. The second part, that's the most important. In the Second Age, Sauron got bodied in a way far more devastating than you might imagine, to the point where the term nuked is quaint. The Akallabêeth destroyed a continent, broke the world, reshaped it. He took what I can only describe as a biblical level cataclysm right to the face, and he still managed to return. though he was marred and he was unable to fully utilize his shape-changing abilities after this, he could no longer make himself appear to be beautiful. Sauron's power being tied up in the One Ring, along with him being in rapport with the ring, even when he was separated from it, means that he will always return. Only the destruction of this ring, with all the power that he put into it going with the ring, will prevent his return. This is why Gandalf, newly empowered by Ilúvatar as the White, makes it clear that black is mightier still. And they had a lot of work to do. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum were the ones who caused Sauron to be undone. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you got to 56 minutes, and you must have enjoyed it, so leave me a like, give me that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and consider membership. You get some great badges that we're going to put on the screen right now. Those look cool. You get a badge and you get emotes and stuff like that. And I'm going to put a thank you to my current members on the screen right now. And I'll see you guys next time with more of your questions.